Today, period 7, 1890 to 1945, but of course it's going to be broken up about several parts here, and we'll begin with progressivism and your man Theodore Roosevelt here. Why 1890? Well, some historians believe that this is where the progressivism started to begin. You know, you got the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890, kind of seeing government trying to actually act. You had the Panic of 1893, Pullman Strike 1894. And you got this kind of debate here about what is going on with society. What are some of the things that we need to address? We love the captains of industry, but maybe some of them have been acting like robber barons. What do we do to what is going to be the entity that will try to help us with child labor, with just work safety? With this sanitation that's going on in cities as more and more people moving to the cities, and what about the political machines? So that's where they see the 1890s. You see people like the settlement houses, like a Jane Addams. You see, Lillian Wall, Florence Kelly, once again, Women's Christian Temperance Union, Emma Willard, things like that, Jacob Riis taking the photographs in there. And to quiz yourself, what kind of national movement is kind of coming to prominence really in the 1890s? What would be that national agrarian-based movement that's really pushing this at this time here for reforms in all levels, local, state, and the national government at this time? What is it? What is it? What is it? I kind of heard somebody out there was thinking that seen the first 7 minutes of this video. That's a Mr. Price. It's populism. You got the, one of those seminal elections there in 1896 was William Jennings Bryan. Okay? So that's why you see kind of the progressive movements kind of dated 1890 to 1920-ish, maybe with the passage or ratification of the 19th Amendment there. Some people say maybe the beginning of World War I, because nobody's going to really, really into really progressive legislation while you're at war. And we kind of want to, as Warren Harding said, return to normalcy after that. So that's what some people have kind of dated. There's no firm dates on here. And my 2 cents about it's about progressivism is that it's never, we study history in a terrible way. We label it. That's what we do as, in all levels of education, from elementary school all the way up to the collegiate level, is that it's hard to really we make it fast, we make it into time periods, we date it, we put it in these kind of, Gilded Age, progressive era periods. And really progressive period, if you kind of catch the mood of the early 20th century, it's not a unified movement at all. It's not like a national phenomenon. It's how historians have kind of say, what are some of the prevalent, most influential ideas that's going through society and government, at this time, and we've kind of labeled it, like I say again, the progressive era. But by no means, it is not something that if you're in rural Nebraska, you're thinking oh, we're in the progressive era, or there's a progressivism is going on here. No, you see what's going on. Maybe what is the kind of catch lines, the major articles that's going on in the media at this time, and that's why we label it the progressive era. So definitely not. So why again progressivism? It's really about extending kind of the social gospel movement, extending what the populists want. And I want you to think about at this time here is that what is the thing that you should kind of learn. You kind of know their agenda, but how do they separate themselves from the populists? What is the contrast? I think that's the thing that you're probably just going to be hard to understand here. Mostly the populists, I told you, are mostly anti-urban, anti-intellectual. And the progressives are more middle class, more professional. And that's how they kind of kind of spurring more the experts, and some people, maybe the populists, would think they're a little bit elitist in a way. And really, I actually think that some of the populists in the late 19th century, unlike 2020 or 21st century kind of populism, is more which what we would kind of see today as left wing, almost socialists, taking over railroads, regulating railroads, kind of like, forming almost a financial system and the banks, really kind of looking at distribution of wealth and income. That's what some of the populists were doing. Okay. And what I was looking out here at the script here, is just that we got to always compare progressivism to other different, we know about what the populists, but other kind of reform times in our, like, looking at society. How can we, like, the perfectibility of society? What have we did to compare and contrast it? What has changed over time from really the early, like really at this time, 18th century here with the Enlightenment. Then you get into the 19th century, mid-19th century reforms, the Second Great Awakening, and all those reform movements that was going on there in the 1830s, 1840s. So you got to contrast that and compare that at the time. It's not like it's something new, what some of the progressives are trying to do to society and to government and all across the nation. What do they want? What do the progressives want? You know what they want because you know what the populists want. But in general, reforms in government, reforms in local, state, and national government. It's usually kind of from the ground up the progressives are doing. They want their neighborhoods cleaned up. They want government to work efficiently. They want companies to work efficiently. This is where you get this Frederick Taylor coming in. They want scientific management of local government, state and national government, and scientific management of businesses. That's what they want. They want this kind of, make sure that it's, run and it doesn't waste. It's standardized in the greatest good. It's maximized for that. And you see all this kind of like Taylorism even goes on today, this kind of, standard practices or best practices. It's kind of that phraseology that he used even back then in the early 20th century. Started out in the 1890s, as we see, like a time, and really kind of flourishes, right, picks up around as more manufacturing, more this kind of like use of these kind of like, assembly line, like, kind of techniques in factories to get maximized production. So they want to do that in government too. They want a city manager. They want that model, and they figure it out like you can study it, you can learn it. You can learn it in Princeton, you can learn it in Harvard, you can learn it in all these foo-foo schools, and you can apply it to society, in here. How you can really make, again, a greater and a better society. That's what you want. And you want to see, and now probably at this time I'm thinking that, I'll put up here on this, like my greatest cartoon here, is this, what do we do about trust? What do we do about the kind of excesses of capitalism? And what do we do about the workers? Let's not destroy capitalism. Progressives do not want to do that. Stay away from anarchy. The socialists, any type of thing that talks about some kind of revolutionary ideas like the IWW, stay away from that. We love capitalism, we love businesses. We want to make it work better and work for society. May need some regulation, some kind of like, some restraint. And that's why that Harper's Weekly cartoon there, like that, I just really should get into your head where we're at this time, What makes these people different from the other reformers? They're more born and raised from urban areas, and I mean fostered in there, looking at things from a kind of city perspective, and they're a little bit more, again, they're mostly middle class and kind of upper middle class and formally educated. And professional class, doctors, lawyers, engineers, And I say that because, we're STEM school and some of you guys are going to engineering, that they figure like, if they are learning, they are formally educated, and maybe you're not, you may need to pass a bar to become a lawyer. They're starting this like having these kind of, doctors and stuff to pass tests and everything to be certified during the early 20th century. You can't just be a Lincoln lawyer and say, hey, I just read some books and I'm a lawyer, or Andrew Jackson. They want some kind of thing here, that's some kind of certificate in the office that you've been formally educated in a way. And even if some of these progressives are not formally educated in the Ivy League schools, maybe they have some kind of higher education at home or something, but you are of that kind of class. And they like to think of themselves as the experts. They know more about helping out the poor than the people living in the cities who are poor. They think they are a little bit superior because they have been formally educated and they can work out things. And this kind of, a lot of the historians want to say they're not social Darwinists. Maybe not in industry, but I will propose they're a little bit more social Darwinists in society. They do believe this kind of like not only the perfectibility of mankind, but almost of man and woman, him or herself, as we know it leads into a lot of these progressives getting into the eugenics movement. That you saw the video that was on there about how you're kind of taken back about some of the progressives you think that you're thinking about today, and it's kind of appalling that yes, they do think that certain women should be sterilized, and they should not have babies, and they are kind of the in the United States, kind of the foundation for the eugenics movement. So regulate, they may be anti-social Darwinists as it implies in industry, but as far as society and like who's superior, well, hey, what they really make of this nationwide movement have national influence here. What do they need? What do they really need to know that this is going to be a way that we study history in here? What is the progressive needs at this time? They need it to be handled by the national government. Well, in the 1890s, you're not really getting that with Benjamin Harrison, Grover Cleveland, and William McKinley. You're not getting that from the executive branch. You're not really getting that from the Supreme Court either, like against some decisions handed out about U.S. versus E.C. Knight and that trust company. So you're really not getting any headway in the 1890s nationwide. You are getting this stuff from statewide. That's some reform that is going on here. What is it that will really throw them in prominence is Theodore Roosevelt. That's the guy, as you can kind of see up here, he is going to be somewhat, not by his choice, a progressive champion. Theodore Roosevelt is not, in the early 20th century, would never confess themselves to be this kind of progressive guy with progressive ideals. But in his actions is going to kind of serve, some, progressive kind of, reforms that they would want, some consumer protection, some, kind of advocating or at least not crushing the labor unions, looking out for the environment in a way. In a way, Theodore Roosevelt, this is very interesting. He's a progressive by default. I mean, think about his background. He's that, he's from the Oyster Bay Roosevelts. He's really rich, comes from a rich background. He's formally educated. He's a voracious reader. He does believe that when he's head of the police commissioners, president of the police commissioners in New York City, he does want them to not take bribes. He does want some reform. So even though he would probably think that his friends Jane Addams is a little bit too out there, that he is by default a progressive. He does believe that in this that like science books and everything can solve stuff, and in such a way that, which I disagree, that he can carry this throughout the world too. And again, civilized society, raise up the uncivilized to where they can maybe if they learn from the Western Europeans and Americans, they can, be with, like civilized nations, and they can trade and be somewhat on par with the modern Western and American nations. All right. So, and again, I cannot say enough about everybody. I just want to take a little bit of time for Theodore Roosevelt. Just give me a couple of minutes because I want to make this clarification. Yes, he's a Republican, and they made him vice president because he was causing a lot of trouble in New York State because he is someone who is always in motion and always wants to get things done. And the Republican Party is a little bit apprehensive about it because they're very, at this time, even as to solidify themselves as pro-business. The Republican Party, very, very pro-business, high tariffs, laissez-faire kind of attitude. Well, Theodore Roosevelt is, Democrats and Republicans, now he is a Republican. Democrats and Republicans today want to claim him. But I'm telling you, I think Theodore Roosevelt, if he looked at 2020, I think he would always see himself even today, as independent minded. That he is someone who wants what Theodore Roosevelt wants or sees as fair and equitable, or what is just. And he will listen to people. Don't get me wrong. I mean, again, he loves Gifford Pinchot, boxes with him, does legislation with him, even like when they were up in New York. And he will invite a Booker T. Washington like that, listen to what he has to say. And I definitely think that he reads and he wants to study, and then he decides in a way about maybe what's best for the country and probably just the American citizenry. He is more this kind of really I tell you, very few presidents that run on more of an independent-minded person and someone to kind of admire in that way. I don't agree with Theodore Roosevelt's, some of his policies, but I do respect, and I had to be a little bit objective here, that I don't think he really, he's one of the few people that say, well, I don't really go by my party, Well, this is true of Theodore Roosevelt. And that's why the Republicans are very, very, really worried as his actions in office. So what makes him progressive? And I told you before, Theodore Roosevelt is not like, I'm coming in to be a progressive in my progressive reform. Breaking up bad trust. And you see the cartoon, the good trust and the bad trust here like that, So that cartoon is always pretty prevalent around, usually in the AP. Acting impartial labor disputes, the anthracite coal mining dispute, 1902. Theodore Roosevelt's coming, the labor, oh my God, let me get my guns, they're gonna lock us off or something. And he really arbitrates. Not really necessarily, again, that he gets the labor unions to kind of concede to, they're not going to strike and they have to accept certain things, but they're not going to be crushed in a way here. So, and conservationist, Newlands Reclamation Act, 1904, probably close to, looking at his estimates about setting aside of land, maybe over really about 150 million acres of land set aside in a federal way. Really just a major, major contribution. And again, looking out for consumers from the railroads here. So you don't have to remember all these acts. Just don't even worry about it. I'm just mentioning them, okay? Elkins Act to kind of get rid of rebates, Hepburn Act to kind of, regulate the prices on the railroad. And after the publication of really the jungle here, you got two things, the Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act in 1906. So looking out for consumers. So you're talking about all these, and and he has a domestic agenda. So it goes along with the 3 C's that we kind of learned earlier, control of corporations, consumer protection, and conservation. So those are the three C's in there. And in the end, I think I had the last thing here is the square deal, not an equal deal, but he's thinking about card dealing, that I should be able, if I'm not dealing and somebody else is dealing, I should be able to cut the cards or do something to shuffle myself. You just want it to be somewhat more of a just or kind of, again, fair deal instead of an equal deal on here. And that's his domestic agenda on Franklin Roosevelt. And I have to say that really, he did not get these through, but there's a lot of things that he'll build his progressive credentials where he's going to run, in 1912 in a third party at the Bull Moose / Progressive Party, that he wanted to do 8-hour work days, do some child labor laws, national health care. Yes, government health care, like that, for I told you that's a kind of theme in the 20th century that's never going to be really come to fruition. Workers' compensation, inheritance and income taxes. He's a little bit early on that. That's going to come about with the 16th Amendment. But he has a lot of street credibility. And I'm telling you, just to get back onto Booker T. Washington, and I don't think he's I think he's more the kind of prevalent at this time that there is kind of the Anglo-Saxons are superior. But I think he respects a man like Booker T. Washington, how educated he is and how he comes across. And he has him over, for dinner, and everybody raised a big ruckus. And because his wife was there, and, he has this, calm everybody down. So, no, it's just a lunch. But I really, if I was a fly on the wall, I'm sure Theodore Roosevelt's thinking to himself, good God, Booker T. Washington is one of the most respected, Negro men, that's the term he used back then, in this country, and I got condemned for it. He's a little bit ahead of his time too, thinking that again, respecting the education of almost anybody and, just their ethics and their learning, no matter, again, their color or background at this time. And a little bit ahead of his time, I do believe, in a way. So, all right, there you go. So you have that and everything. So, foreign policy, cannot, just think about his goals here. Speak softly, carry a big stick. The policeman of Latin America in here, that that you will kind of look after things. The United States will kind of come in if there's some unrest in the Dominican Republic, Venezuela, that we will kind of intervene in it on here. Making sure, Mr. Price, you keep on going on about Theodore Roosevelt. That's why you see this kind of crossfade in here that I'm saying, speak softly, but carry a big stick in here. But the main thing to remember, and this is big, and you should put it down, somewhere, is the Roosevelt corollary, right? Because it's change over time or continuity. I cannot emphasize that enough. You have to go back to our foreign policy influences and maybe statements on foreign policy and actions. Going back to Washington, building upon the Monroe Doctrine. This is essay material here. This is complex understanding for your last paragraph, the unicorn point. This is historical context. You need to team up with these kind of major foreign policy statements here. Yes, we'll get into dollar diplomacy, moral diplomacy you can add on, but this is really big that Theodore Roosevelt is. He sends out the White Fleet in 1906. He wants to make America and to say, hey, we're building up the Navy. We are a great power too. He's always ready to war. He's always, he's settling the dispute between U.S. and Japan. He wants to say, if there's unrest in the Western Hemisphere, we will get involved. I had no problem with that. I will start a revolution, in Panama, Colombia at the time, to create a country called Panama, to start building my canal. So he will, and he wants Europeans, basically he's telling them, say, hey, just kind of stay out. He's kind of reasserting there in the Roosevelt corollary. That's big, big, big. Make sure that you get that down somewhere in your notes, and always know about our foreign policy statement and actions and change and continuity over time. Other hot stuff: progressivism continues with Taft and Wilson. Even though Wilson's a Democrat and Taft is a more conservative Republican than Roosevelt, he's still trust buster, even though Roosevelt's known as a trust buster in there. So we'll talk about more about that on Thursday. So, but that they're known as progressive presidents in a way here. The kind of zenith, the apex of the progressive movement, just you see these amendments known as progressive amendments: 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th Amendment. And you should know those amendments. And I told you they're the hot amendments, along with the 14th, 15th Amendment, the 10th Amendment, and of course, I just assumed that the First Amendment. Progressive All-Stars, get to the celebrities: Jane Addams, and this time, you're talking about the most influence here, the Upton Sinclair with the Jungle. In here, Jacob Riis earlier in the 1890s with his pictures on here, and again, the others maybe is Frosting, if you know Lincoln Steffens, Shame of the Cities, and Ida Tarbell, like that on here. So as far as talking about John D. Rockefeller in here, so Standard Oil Company, other ones like Frank Norris and all this, knowing all they're publishing all these days in McClure's, Cosmopolitan, Harper's, in these magazines here to kind of expose. And they labeled all these writers, get thrown in by Theodore Roosevelt. And it's a very insulting term, but almost they take it up with a badge of honor. And this is a big term that you definitely should know at this time: muckrakers, like that. They're exposing these kind of like corruption, but Theodore Roosevelt think they're sensationalizing to sell magazines to make them more like of a celebrity in a way. So, but they're kind of, again, looking at these things. And again, Upton Sinclair with the Jungle. He's trying to really talk about his socialist agenda, but he really gets more consumer protection during this time. All right, good. And really oh yeah, that's right. I was just looking at her. Yeah, Robert La Follette, kind of, again, from the Wisconsin idea, and that's where you see all these kind of progressive kind of ideas like recall initiative, referendum, all those kind of ballot initiatives making more democracy more prevalent. And I like my last kind of statement here: civil rights movement never really meshes with the progressives. You have a very left-wing kind of progressive person who's truly progressive, like Jane Addams, but she's kind of more, I would say, the exception. Her and maybe an Alice Paul or something like that, as far as what they want for, women's vote and equality, and the other progressives. They're kind of, again, on this standard about what this kind of racial hierarchy that's just really prevalent not only in the United States, but around the world. That, this kind of accepted science here about, like, the superiority of races of people in here. And they never really met. Du Bois, Ida Wells, 1909, NAACP, kind of the follows up on the Niagara movement from 1905. Really a prevalent kind of organization that forms. You've got the crisis, always trying to publicize the kind of all the persecution and all the discrimination that's going on with African Americans throughout the nation, not only in the South here. So, you speaking of confusing things here, even from Ida Wells, who worked with the Red Record in the Gilded Age in the early 20th century, to Ida Tarbell. From Theodore Roosevelt to Franklin Roosevelt, kind of know which one. That can also be on your crib confusing cheat sheet to kind of remind you of, just get your mind in place here if you do get like an essay that relates to any of those people and you want to make sure you're clear. All right, okay.